Hi guys, it's Mr. Pedigo here. Hope you guys are having a great Wednesday. It's April 15th today. It's middle of the week. We're kind of hopefully focusing our writing, getting things revised and edited at this point because we have tomorrow and then Friday to submit them. So we really want to make sure we're spending some time to catch silly mistakes and to follow the drafting process mentioned in the previous video. I want to talk with you guys about communication. As seventh and eighth graders, students who are getting ready really to go into high school, you have to know how to communicate effectively, both in your speaking and in your writing, right? Because really, the reality of it is the way we communicate really it influences the way people perceive us. Does that make sense? When we communicate in a certain way, people think of us differently, right? So, for instance, if you went into a Kroger or to a store and started screaming at an employee and throwing things, that would make you come off as somebody who didn't have a very firm grasp on their temper, was volatile, angry, rude, and didn't follow social norms and customs. It would paint you as a kind of crazy person, so to speak. The same thing, it's kind of a extreme example, but the same thing's true in our writing. I know you guys have probably met people who when they speak, they don't use appropriate grammar, they don't use proper English, and what do you think of them when you hear somebody? And it's sad sometimes because they're maybe uneducated. You'll hear people talk and use just very misuse words, misuse grammar, and you think of them as somebody who's not educated, right? You maybe they are educated. Maybe they just didn't have very good instruction in their communication. So we form ideas about people based upon the way they communicate. Now, the same thing's true, especially since we are in this online classroom, this quarantine. We've been doing a lot of correspondence via email. And when we send emails to people, people form an idea about us from the email, right? I can attest to that as a teacher, both at St. Michael's and at Maysville Community and Technical College. When I receive emails from people, I immediately, one, form an opinion about them, whether I want to or not, and two, I also place on a certain level of importance and hierarchy, right? So long story short, I basically am judging people by the way they, correspond via email in the same way we would be judging somebody by screaming in a Kroger. Judging doesn't mean like, oh, I'm so judging you, but making, thinking about them differently because of the way they're communicating. And also I basically determine whether or not it's important or not based upon how well it's put together. Because I honestly don't have time for things that are so poorly written that I can't even, they clearly didn't put any, effort into writing it. And so it's not important to them to say it the correct way. It's not important to me. So let's talk about that. So formatting emails. What are some basic, rules when formatting emails? So I'm going to bring you guys around this way so you can see my screen. So we're looking at Gmail, which you guys are of course familiar with seeing. We have the recipient, the person who's going to get the email. So let's just put in Andy Arn, our principal, and there we go. Now what you see down here, this is the subject line. So what's the subject? Well, the subject, basically the title of the email. It's what the email is about. I wouldn't write an entire sentence here because that's not where the message goes. I would instead just put the subject. So if I said, hey, Andy, how are you doing today? Now, what's wrong with this? One, the message is in the subject line. Andy is, his name's not capitalized. This is not capitalized. This is terrible grammar, terrible spelling, terrible etiquette. I would say, maybe I would want to just give the subject of the email. So maybe you just say, well, what's new? Sure, whatever. So what's new? That would be maybe a more appropriate. That way Andy's like, when he received this email, he'll say, oh, Harry wants to know what's new. Now down here in the message section, I would put my message. So I'd say, Andy. I would address him appropriately with a capital name. Now, I would call him Andy because he's my colleague, but if you were addressing him, you would call him Mr. Arn because he is your superior, Mr. Arn, and then you would continue your message down here, the same way you would do a letter, right? So the long and short of it is use the subject line as a subject line or title, not as the body of the message, and make sure that you're using appropriate capitalization, appropriate grammar, and appropriate etiquette with emailing. Make sure that you do that in your correspondence with me, with other teachers, with anybody via email, because like I said, people form judgments about people when they communicate with them. If I saw this was just full of abbreviations and lack of information and lack of time, I would assume that it wasn't very important to you as the writer, and therefore it shouldn't be very important to me as the reader. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? If I were like this, in the same way, if I were performing music and I was doing a really sloppy job, I wasn't taking my time with it, doing my best, you would say, well, he's not really putting his effort into this, so why should I put my effort into listening to it? Same thing's true with writing, and same thing's true with emails. Talk to you guys soon.